All right. To start with, this recording is going to cover the portions relating to the P2 pillar, which is essential for the MCS case study. So we will be covering all the topics that's necessary, as well as those topics that is important to remember for the case study purpose. With that, let's go on to my window sharing. Yes. Right. Okay. All right. So to start with, the first chapter is about activity-based costing and activity-based management. The CGMA has come up with a transformational model that suggests the six methods or six things that needs to be looked at when you are looking at a cost transformation. The model has six suggested changes for organizations that come together to achieve the objective. These changes are engendering a cost conscious culture. It is very important, right? When a leadership has undertaken a cost reduction or in terms of being conscious of the cost that is incurred in the organization, it cannot just be from the top management, right? Just because the top management has taken this decision, it does not mean that it just happens overnight. So it is important for the top management to build such a culture within the organization where people at every levels in the department between various functions has ingrained this culture where they are able to constantly work in such a manner that they look at ensuring that they are trying to test whether this is the possible or the best solution or best way forward. So one of the important thing that CGMA says or suggests is that a company itself has to build a culture where they are conscious of their cost. Engendering a cost conscious culture. The organization should aim to be a cost leader so that its costs are lower than rivals and set a competitive benchmark. Everyone in the organization should be motivated and enabled to reduce costs in whatever way possible. Technology can play a key role in cost reduction. If you see most of the finance transformation or digital transformation, there's a lot of transformation projects that is undertaken by companies. Right now, one of the best way to keep the employees motivated through this transformation or transition of the company's company-wide changes is by trying to entice them to adapt this change, right? It can be monetary, it can be in terms of letting the employees know that this is the way forward for the company. Whenever there is a transformation, it does not come without any risk, right? One of the most important thing is mitigating these risks that comes in trying to build a very cost conscious culture. So the next step is about managing the risks that come from a cost conscious culture. For example, reducing costs may result in reducing quality and customer satisfaction. You see that most of these companies that undertake third party servicing sort of always fights their margins. It's a very thin line margin for such businesses, right? So in this case, how do they fight this margin? How do they try to make more out of the projects that they have won in the past? It is by reducing cost. But now reducing cost does not mean that I can do it overnight. There's some sort of quality reductions that you can see because of this cost reductions that has been adapted to by the company. And eventually that leads to customer being dissatisfied, right? When you see a reduced quality. So it is important that these sort of risks are mitigated when the company is trying to build a cost conscious culture. For example, reducing cost may result in reducing quality and customer satisfaction. The organization should have a clear risk management process in place to identify, assess, and manage such risk. Every time, if you see a company who is trying to indulge in transformation, right, they are well aware of the risks that come from um, adapting to change, right? So the first thing that they need to do as a company is to bring in a game plan where they are aware of what are the risks that can be faced by the company and how can this be mitigated. That is basically identify, assess, and manage. Connecting products with profitability. It will be important that every product or service makes a positive contribution to overall organizational profits. This will involve understanding what drives cost for each individual product and allocating shared cost to products as accurately as possible. So, when I think about shared cost, what comes to our head? It's a corporate cost, right? Most of the time, the divisions are fighting over this corporate cost, which is not controllable by them. So it is important to make sure that uh, whatever form of cost reduction methodologies they're trying to adopt, it's the cost that can be controlled and cannot be controlled must be divided, and you need to find the ways to reduce these costs and also the risk associated with reducing these costs. Okay. And once you've done that, it is very important to make sure that each of your product is assigned to these cost drivers, because without understanding what is driving the cost in the company, you cannot really mitigate or reduce the cost or the risk associated with reducing the cost. Generating maximum value through new products. As part of product design, the product or service should be made to be as flexible as possible so that it appeals or can adapt as many customer segments as possible. You can see this in the car automobile itself, right? Now we have the Cuppcar. So one of the ways in which they try to reduce cost is by car trimming. They try to create models which has some similar features, but they try to upgrade the features and introduce many models or many cars into the various segments, to be it the cost conscious market or be it the niche market, right? But if you see, the features is what creates these various models. Like for example, as basic as the Swift in India, or let's say the Kia segment itself, they have various models under the diesel segment and the petrol and automated transmission models as well. So this is one of the ways they try to ensure that, you know, they are able to enter all segments of the market and also make sure that they're trying to meet the needs of the customers. The potential profitability of new products should be assessed before production begins. So one of the ways to reduce costs is at the design stage itself, right? If you see the models, they all look the same way. It's just the features in these models that varies from model to model. Incorporating sustainability to optimize profits. Consider the environmental impacts of products. Negative impacts can add cost as well as damaging reputations and sales. See, in the past, it was only the developed countries that looked at waste management. But today, it is not just them, or it is also the developing countries that is trying to put in a conscious effort to ensure that they can at the design stage itself optimize the fuel consumption. Fuel consumption in the combustion stage gives out a lot of gases into the environment that has harmful effects, right? So they're now trying to optimize at the design stage itself to increase the efficiency. Understanding cost drivers. This involves investigating costs to determine why they change and how different variables impact on the cost. Very important, right? If you see in the past, we've had certain materials that's used in the cars that have spiked up because of shortage of supply, because of lack of availability of the resources required to produce the product. So it is important to understand who are these drivers of cost that is increasing our price to sell in the market. Plans should be put in place to reduce the drivers of cost as well as the cost themselves. So if you see here, it is not just about, when we say cost transformation, it is not just about cost reductions. There's so many things that comes in play here. The risk that's associated with it. Now that we are looking at cost reduction, how can we reduce it? Do we just cut down costs by cutting headcounts? No, that's just one way of reducing costs. But there are other ways as well in the production stage, in the manufacturing stage. How can we build in certain designs and technologies to reduce cost at the start itself, rather than firefighting at the later stage? One of the best costing techniques that is used in the market with that especially in companies where a lot of products are sold in the market. For example, we spoke about car segments where a lot of cars are sold in the market with this slight upgrade to the features, to the technology that is used to build the car. Right now, in these cases, there are a lot of activities that differentiate these products. So it is important to look at the cost drivers at the activity level as well. Cooper and Kaplan stated that it was the support activities that were the cause of many overheads: material handling, quality inspection, setting up machinery, and material acquisitions, etc. Thus, a simple three-step philosophy was developed. Support activities, cost. The product consumed these activities, cost should therefore be charged on the basis of consumption of the activities. So, what is activity based costing? It is an approach to the costing and monitoring of activities which involve tracing resource consumption and costing final outputs. So, what does it say here? It is important to identify what activity drives the cost. Once you have identified that, you have identified what is um, the driving factor, root cause analysis, right? So once you've done that, these cost drivers are then used to identify how can we manage our pool of funds, pool of resources. So the activity based costing has a hierarchy here. So it is checked at either the unit level or at a batch level, product level, and facility. Because every time a product is produced, it is not just the number of products produced, but it is also to do with the facilities that are associated with it and also the product itself. So unit level activities are performed each time a unit of product is produced. They're consumed in direct proportion to the number of units produced. Expenses in this category include direct labor, direct material, energy cost, machine maintenance. Batch related activities. Now, when you're looking at unit level activities, right, there are different costs that drives different activities that drive the cost. At the batch level, it slightly varies. Batch related activities are performed each time a batch is produced. The cost of batch related activities varies with the number of batches made, but is common for all units within the batch. If you remember, we had something called as the overhead absorption rate. How do you identify this? You take whatever the overhead cost is and divide it by the number of units that is produced. Now, this is a traditional method of absorbing the cost um, throughout the products that's produced in the company. But in today's market, it is important to understand the granular bits, right? And that's why ABC has come in the picture. Product sustaining activity are performed to support different products in the product line. They are performed to enable different products to be produced and sold, but the resources consumed are independent of how many units or batches are being produced. Now, we looked at unit, batch, product, but there are a lot of facility or infrastructure that is needed in order to run this business, right? So some costs cannot be related to a particular product line. Instead, they are related to maintaining building and the facilities. These examples include maintenance of the building, plant security, and business rates. So we understood that yes, ABC is good. ABC management will help us understand what drives the cost in the business in order to reduce the cost. So obviously, just like all sort of theoretical uh, models, it has its own benefits and drawbacks. ABC, in this case, their benefits is that it's more accurate because you are able to identify the granular activity that causes these costs. It's flexible enough to analyze cost, but by cost objects other than products such as process areas of managerial responsibilities and customers. Yes, it is a very reliable tool. It is meaningful financial information because you are trying to look at what is the cost pool, what drives these cost pools, basically the cost driver, and then you're trying to find ways to reduce these cost drivers, right? So aids in identification and understanding of cost behavior and thus has the potential to improve cost estimations. Very important for all businesses, right? It is important to understand that we know what is our cost. what drives our costs, and how can we better budget, forecast these costs. So provides a more logical, acceptable, and comprehensible basis for costing work. Obviously, this has certain limitations. The limitations, which is very common for all costing methods, is the fact that we are taking data that is historical, and certain trends or certain macro environmental issues can change these cost patterns, right? For example, we spoke about the chip, we spoke about manufacturing production, right? There were certain resources that triggered a spike in cost. During the COVID time, it was the chip production, which is done in Taiwan. So now what happened to these chip production in Taiwan? There were certain reasons that restricted them from manufacturing it. The availability of certain resources to manufacture the product was limited. So that drove the cost. There were a lot of production halts because of lack of this chip that was scarce during the COVID period, right? So these things kind of increase the cost to produce. Thus, you saw the cars are also becoming more expensive. And obviously, implementing these ABC has its own drawbacks in terms of the theoretical implementation of this in real life, right? It had its practical problems, such as identifying the cost driver or selecting the cost driver, and its novelty is questionable. So, what does this mean? This means that we really don't know whether ABC truly helps in cost reduction or cost identification, assessing of the cost that is incurred in the company. But it is a technology that seems to be working, but nobody really knows that what is the actual impact from this. ABC has a role in a longer term decision making. Very important. ABC contributes to a long term. If you implement ABC today, it does not mean that you will see a cost reduction today itself. It is for the long term, because you need to identify these cost drivers and slowly try to increase efficiency by reducing these cost drivers. Activities to take, and what are the do's and don'ts? Get buy-in from the rest of the business. ABC provides business managers as well as the finance function with the information needed to value business decisions. Use ABC for pricing and product prioritizing decisions. What do you mean by product prioritizing? It's about what product do you want to focus on. If you see, just like the Pareto rule, that is the 80-20 rule, a lot of the overheads, or rather the 80% of the overheads, come from activities that are small, like a limited activity. The 20% of these activity may contribute to 80% of your overheads. Right? So it is important to identify what are these products you want to prioritize. Implementing ABC cannot be done company wide in just as a project overnight, right? So what are these what are these high revenue generating products? You need to take those products first and then prioritize implementation of any cost transformation. Any transformation for that matter, you cannot do that company wide overnight, right? So you need to identify what are your priority. You need to see what is the highest revenue generating products that you want to prioritize and see where you can reduce cost, right? What are the don'ts? Do not get caught up in too much attention to detail and control. It can obscure the bigger picture or make the firm lose sight of the strategic objectives. Most often, if you see in companies, we start looking at trivial matters, right? We start looking at things that don't really matter to the strategy. So it is important to implement these costing techniques in areas that have strategic focus. So next point is, it is important not to fall into the trap of thinking ABC costs are relevant for all decisions. Not all costs will disappear if a product is discontinued. An example being building occupancy costs. Okay. So now we spoke about activity-based costing. Next is the activity-based management. What does ABM mean? It is a system of management which uses activity-based cost information for a variety of purposes, including cost reduction, cost modeling, and customer profitability analysis. So management is basically trying to take the information that it gathers from activity-based costing and then use this information to reduce cost through various cost modeling techniques, and finally identifying your profitability from various customers or various product. ABM is simply using the information derived from an ABC analysis for cost management. ABM seeks to classify each activity within a process as a value added or a non value added activity. So, one of the ways to eliminate the activities we are doing is to see what value it adds, right? So, then you bifurcate into value addition, non value addition. So, these non value added activities, how do you try to reduce the cost drivers from this? Sometimes these non value added activities are still needed to sustain the product or the production, right? So how do you reduce the cost drivers from this? That becomes a very important information. ABM will find there are five basic information outputs: the cost of activities and business processes, the cost of non-value added activities, activity-based performance measures, and accurate product service cost. So once you've identified your cost pool, right, how are you bifurcating? See, some costs are directly related to the volume of production, but some aren't. So how are you taking these costs and trying to divide it between various products and the units of products that's being produced? There's some tips that is given as a best practice or the standard base, the company or best practice, right? So what is it? Get the support of senior management. Very important. If you are implementing something at a granular, like at the operational level, you understand that these things have to be implemented in order to achieve a certain output. But how do you convey this to your senior management? Very important. Second step, recognize that ABM requires a major investment in time and resources. Know what ABM can achieve and what information you want from the system. Just like any theoretical models that's been implemented in business, it is important to understand whether it really helps the particular business. The kind of nature of the business should support these theories, right? Only then can you implement and you can see some fruitful reactions out of it. Decide which model to use. Choose the model approach that emphasizes the operational understanding of all activities in the business. Involve people in the field. Very important. The ground staff is the one who knows the reality. So it is important to involve these people who are actually doing the work. Transfer ownership of cost management from the accounts department to the departments and process where the costs are incurred. Very important to decentralize, right? Because at this, when you consolidate something, you are actually sort of losing control over the day-to-day things. So it is important that once you've implemented a cost strategy, you need to decentralize it, put it into the respective departments who understand the cost and encourage them to reduce the cost. Don't underestimate the need to manage the change process and link ABM to corporate objectives in the form of increased product profitability and added value for customers. So the end result is basically cost reduction and then trying to see whether your customers are contributing to the profits in spite of the cost reduction, and also ensure that you're still adding value to the customers when you are trying to involve in some sort of transformations internally. Direct product profitability. See, now once you've understood the cost drivers, you've understood the cost pools and ways to reduce the cost, it is important to see how are you doing in terms of your customers. Are you generating enough revenue? Are you generating enough revenue to meet the profit margins that's required to sustain the business? A couple of technologies or softwares have been built around the direct product profitability as well as your customer profitability. So this way, you know whom your focus should be towards. You cannot focus on your customers who are not giving you a maximum revenue, or that revenue is not material enough for your business to focus the strategy towards it. Okay. So direct product profitability, there are a lot of software systems that can be purchased to model this costing technology technique. They require a number of key variables to analyze the different situations. what are these variables? The buying and the selling price, very key important information, because that is your top um, line, right? Your selling price. Your unit price will give you the overall revenue. Next, the rate of sale, the inventory holding size. Very important to understand that when we are doing our costing, it is not just the directly contributable cost that needs to be taken into consideration. There are other things like your inventory holding, which every time you hold inventory, there's a cost associated with it. There's floor space, your lighting, your resources that are used to monitor the inventory management or the security stuff. So all of these contribute to your inventory holding, as well as every time you are trying to bring in and store your stock, there is something called pallet configuration that is done, right? So the larger the number of cases on the pallet, the cheaper handling cost per unit. So now your product, when you are trying to place it one over the other, it is important to note that you are trying to consolidate your pallet size, but also you shouldn't be damaging your cargo. So there are a lot of complications that come around it, but these are the key variables that contribute to your direct product profitability calculations. The ordering size. Obviously, fewer orders will be cheaper, but fewer orders will mean holding more inventory. So if you see, there's a lot of correlation between each other. You cannot try to reduce your ordering cost and say, okay, I'm good with this, because that will build your inventory. So if you see, cost has a lot of correlation to various other variables. So as a management accountant, it becomes very important for you to be able to understand these variables and see how each of these are correlated and how they can be reduced in order to increase your customer profitability. With this, we covered chapter 1. The next chapter is about the modern business environment. In the modern business environment, it is not just about the cost element, right? It is also how do you produce this product? How lean are you in terms of production to ensure that you do not pass on this cost burden to your customers? Because at the end of the day, if you have X amount of cost, you will put X into 2 times, right? Because you need to ensure that you make your profit margins. So to sustain the business, if you need 8% margin, then it will be your cost, which is X times 8. So every time you're trying to increase your cost, you'll have to increase the uh, market price, and that is a very competitive thing, right? Because there are other people who are able to use some sort of technology that you do not have to reduce the cost. So in the modern business environment, it is more like a push system or a pull system, where you can't just really push your production into the market and say, I will sell the product. Here you need to pull, you need to understand what is the demand, or what is the price that the customers are willing to pay for your product, and then go on with your production. So with this came the need to keep your internal production lean. So one of the techniques that was commonly famously used by the Toyota, as well as many other manufacturing brands that took on this uh, study, is the just in time, right? A production system which is driven by demand for finished product, whereby each component on a production line is produced only when needed for the next stage. So this way you're keeping your production very lean. You are not producing until there's a demand for the product, and then you're keeping the inventory that is only needed for the production as on that day. A purchasing system in which material purchases are contracted so that the receipt and usage of material to the maximum extent possible coincide. Key, right? To you're producing today. Don't get your inventory like a month in advance, because that's going to increase your inventory holding period. So it is important that you bring in the material just when it is needed for production. So now how do you do this? By ensuring that you have a very tight connection with your suppliers, and they understand that as and when there is a trigger pull for the demand of the raw materials, they are able to supply that raw material. Just in time requires the following. The labor force must be versatile so that they can perform any job within reason to keep production flowing as required. Workers in a just in time cell are trained to operate all the machines within it and perform routine preventive maintenance on them. So, in the past, laborers were working on a specific machines and they only knew that machine, right? They was a subject matter expert in that area. But today, the laborers are required to be more versatile. That's not just in manufacturing, even us, right? If we are working in the company as an accountant, we can't just sit and do a GL close, right? That's not the expectation. You know, do the ledger closure at the period end and report the numbers. We are also required to do analysis and try to work with the business to find ways to improve our balance sheet and P&L. Likewise, even in the manufacturing segment, laborers are required to be very versatile. Production process must be grouped by product line rather than by function in order to eliminate inventory movements between workstations and to speed flow. Very important, right? You can't say that okay, as this um, my department only focuses on packaging, so let me just do the packaging and pass it on to the next department. No, in this department where the production is taking place, all of the things from the raw material, conversion of the raw material to finished goods, packaging, and then out. So the conveyor belt should be able to do a particular production in batch, produce a required production, and close it, and then move on to the next product line. It has to be based on product line and not based on the department. A simple, infallible information system. Get it right first time. So here, one of the important thing is they have zero tolerance to wastage, right? So whatever you do, do it right. Make sure that there are zero defects and you're able to reduce waste as much as possible. So here the question of waste is not there because you are trying to ensure that you're constantly working on your production methodology and ensuring that there is zero defects. And all of this can be only achieved if you have a very strong supplier relationship. So here it is not just about numbers, but also the relationship that you're trying to build with your ecosystem. Tool quality management, very important even for Cuppcar, right? TQM in the general name given to programs will seek to ensure that goods are produced and services supplied of the highest quality. There are two basic principles for TQM. Get it right first time, continuous improvements. So we are not without a drop. Human tend to make mistakes, right? But then just making mistakes cannot be a solution to the problems. Being tolerant to these mistakes cannot be the solution to the problem. So how, every time you see that there is a way to improve your systems, improve the way in which you operate, go on to implement that. Try to continuously improve the way you are trying to work. The second basic principle of TQM is dissatisfaction with the status quo. What does this mean? It means that don't be okay with the way you're operating. Most often, work tends to be mundane and we tend to do what has been asked to. Don't be okay with that. See how you can improve. Realistically, a zero defect goal may not be obtainable. It does, however, provide a target to ensure that a company should never be satisfied with its present level of rejects. The management and staff should believe that it is always possible to improve and to be able to get more right next time. Okay. So now the cost. There's something called as conformance and non-conformance cost. So what do you mean by conformance? Conformance is something that as a cost is incurred in order to ensure that you don't make mistakes. These are some form of a preventive and appraisal cost where you are trying to do your quality check, regular maintenance of your machineries to ensure that no breakdowns or no defective products are produced in the end. So what are these non-conformance costs? Again, I'd like to reiterate it that costs are important at all aspects, right? But some costs can be a very expensive affair for you. And non-conformance costs are such costs. They are of the nature where it is incurred once it's the product is already produced, or the product has already been shipped out. Now let's say the products that have been shipped out, right? What happens here? It's not just the fact that you have given a defective product out in the market, but it also affects your reputation, your brand image. So even for Cuppcar, right, if they are able to increase their conformance cost, it's okay, because they are trying to make sure that they are meeting the quality requirements. uh, because the cost of non-conformance, let's say some sort of recall that is done by a manufacturer, it is an expensive affair. Taking all the cars back, trying to repair it and send it out in the market is a huge affair to the brand, to the company as well, and the staff. So conformance cost is divided into prevention and appraisal cost, whereas the non-conformance cost is divided into internal failure cost and external failure cost. These arise. What is internal failure cost? These are costs that are incurred after production, but it is not shipped out. Whereas external failure cost is something that is caused after the product has gone out from the production unit. Successful implementation of TQM an organization should undertake to achieve each of the following to ensure TQM is successful. Total commitment throughout the organization, just like ABM or any costing technique, the full organization must be in line, right? They need to commit themselves fully in order to achieve this. Get close to their customer to fully understand their needs and expectation. Plan to do all jobs right the first time. Agree expected performance standards with each employee and customers. It is very important. You set your target and make sure that you achieve these targets. Implement a company-wide improvement process. Continually measure performance levels that have been achieved. Measure the cost of quality mismanagement and the level of firefighting. Because if you see a company and a process is continuously firefighting, then there's a problem, right? Because you are trying to fight the problem when it arises. Rather, predetermine this and analyze what are the risks that's associated, what can come in the future, and try to solve the problem then and there. Demand continuous improvements in everything you and your employees do. Recognize achievements, make quality a way of life. If you see all of these brands that have been able to sustain in the automobile industry, quality has been their way of life. BMW, Mercedes, Toyota, right? They have been able to keep their brand going because quality is what they've always been focusing on. Quality circle. What are these quality circles? A quality circle is a team of 4 to 12 people, usually coming from the same area, who voluntarily meet on a regular basis to identify, investigate, analyze, and solve work-related problems. All of these just in time, TQM, quality circles, all of these were first brought in to the industry by Toyota. So that's the reason why you see that the industry is always benchmarking themselves against these sort of techniques that Toyota have been able to bring in the system. One of the common things that you might have heard in the past is the bin system, right? They had this bin system where once they reach a certain target, certain levels of the inventory have dropped down, there's an immediate trigger, and that will push the people in the stores to bring in more inventory. Right, so there were many techniques like these that was implemented by the Toyota that have been like a best practice in the industry. Non-financial measures in management reporting include number of defects at inspection scene. This is very important for us, right? If you're looking at our balance scorecard from the E2 pillar and you're trying to see the customer satisfaction or the internal process operations part of the balance scorecard, these are some of the non-financial measures that can be done in order to understand whether the company is doing the right thing. Number of defects, number of reworks, number of defective units, number of customer complaints, number of defective units supplied by the supplier themselves, time taken to respond to customer requests. What is the turnaround by the company to the customers? Right? All of these contribute, and these can be your key metrics to see whether the company is in the right direction or not. And also a balance scorecard, which gives you an eagle eye view on all of these areas, will look at these non financial metrics as a KPI. Throughput accounting and the theory of constraints. What is throughput? It is nothing but the sales revenue less any direct material cost. The process of identifying and taking steps to remove the constraints that restrict output is known as the theory of constraints. Throughput is nothing but taking in the raw material, converting it, and being able to produce the product and send it out into the market. So obviously, every time you're trying to do this, there are bottlenecks, right? So it is important to identify what are these bottlenecks. It can be the number of units that a particular machine can produce. So that becomes your bottleneck. For example, in the past, we had something called as what do you call this? Lego, right? Now they used to produce these Lego parts. They use a molding machine. Now this molding machine will restrict the number of uh, units that it can produce, because after a certain unit of production, the mold will not be able to give you an accurate shape and size to the product. So that becomes your bottleneck, right? So how are you able to exploit this bottleneck? Subordinate everything else to the decisions in step two. Evaluate the system's bottlenecks. If in the previous steps a bottleneck has been broken, go back to step one. The idea of constraints is central to the throughput approach. Example of constraints may include inadequately trained sales force, poor reputation for meeting delivery dates, poor physical distribution systems, unreliability of material supplies, delivery and or quality, inadequacy in production resources, inappropriate management accounting systems. So what is throughput accounting ratio? It is nothing but return per factory hour divided by cost per factory hour. Cost per factory hour is identified as the total factory cost divided by total time on the bottleneck resources. So this three lines, the throughput accounting ratios, that is the cost per factory hours and as well as the return per factory hour, which is used to identify the throughput accounting ratio, is very important. Kaizen costing. Just like all of these techniques, TQM, GIFT and type, Kaizen costing is also focusing on something called as the cost reduction targets, right? You set a target and incrementally try to reduce this cost. Cost reduction targets are set and applied on a more frequent basis than standard cost. Continuous improvement or Kaizen is an integral part of the just-in-time management philosophy. Very important line. Just-in-time, Kaizen plays a very important role. Kaizen is a Japanese term meaning to improve process via small incremental amounts rather than through large innovation. So this is an incremental approach. It is not like a transformation technique. It's a slow process where you're constantly trying to find ways to improve your processes. Now, I spoke about this inventory management, right? Toyota commonly use something called as a Kanban system, where a card was placed in the bins, and every time a certain inventory depletion was there, a trigger would be drawn, and the stores would bring in the new, fresh inventory. Now, we spoke about incremental ways in which you could continuously improve, right? Now, BPR is a very um, opposite of what we just studied so far. Here, you're trying to do something that is a drastical change, so, where you're trying to implement a process which is done rather in a radical way, where a technology is trying to reduce it. For many cases, common example is your transactional roles, right? One of the ways to reduce or eliminate the transactional roles is by bringing in technology. So BPR is one such method which is looking at activities in the businesses that can reduce cost, increase quality through the use of technology. Like we spoke about how you divide cost between value added and non-value added, it is important to analyze what is your value added activities and what are your non-value added activities in order to increase your efficiency. And another important thing that every company looks into is insourcing and outsourcing. Is it good for us to keep it in-house, or is it important that we outsource the activity? So now let's, once we've divided value-added activities, non-value-added activities, let's say these non-value-added activities is not contributing to our strategic focus, but it is still important to be done. These activities have to still go on. In this case, you can see whether it's a core competency or a threshold competency. Obviously, non-added value activity becomes a threshold competency. So, can I outsource it? Right. So, again, when you are trying to recommend such things to your business, it is important to look into the pros and cons. Yeah, what are the risks associated with it, and what are the advantages of doing so? With this, we completed chapter 1 and 2, and let's take a short break.